What's up everyone? Welcome back to the shop. We are going to do a scroll saw project today. More specifically, we're going to do this sweet picture from Amazing Spider-Man issue 351, drawn by Mark Bagley in 1991. Now before we do that though, we're going to make a picture frame for our artwork before we actually make the artwork. I know that's kind of opposite, right? You usually have artwork and then you frame it. But in this case, we can't make the artwork without the frame. It'll make sense later on. I'm gonna take one of these walnut boards, I'm gonna cut it into strips over here at the table saw. Then we'll just set those over to the side because we'll use those later to make this picture frame real nice.
Really nice, huh?
Blue mahoe grows in Jamaica and it is naturally blue. It's really amazing stuff. And it's gonna be the perfect wood for a Spider-Man picture frame. I'm gonna take this piece and slice it till we get thin pieces and then take those and inlay that right into the middle of our picture frame. Cut the notches in the picture frame and I have my blue mahoe, which I can now glue that into place. Now my piece here is not as wide as my frame, so I cut a piece of walnut as a filler that I can glue that in there to fill the entire gap. This walnut piece you won't see because after this I plan to cut another piece and put another piece on top of this and create this really cool stacked effect. Remember those pieces I said let's cut them, set them off to the side, we'll deal with them later? Well, now it's time to get them back out. What we're gonna do is we're gonna cut out a really cool shape and then glue that onto those picture frame pieces that we already made. To do that, I jumped on the computer and I came up with a template. I really just drew a geometric shape that I thought would look kind of cool, printed that out, and now I could take that, spray glue that onto our pieces, cut that out with the bandsaw, and then glue that onto our picture frame. Our frame pieces look really cool. Now it's time to cut the miters for those, which I'm gonna do here at the table saw. This thing looks freaking cool. Now at this point I could glue the whole thing together and then put some splines in the corners, which I did on my last scroll saw project if you want to check that out. In this case though, I don't think I want to do that. Instead, I'm going to put some dominoes in the corners and then glue the whole thing together. I put a rabbiting bit in the router table, so now we get to take this big wooden square and actually make it into a picture frame. We have a big round over from using that router bit. Sharp chisel, we could square that up. Now that our frame is done, it's time to start working on that scroll saw art. So let's throw up our picture of Spider-Man. Now, I like to use a black and white picture, not a color picture. So let's turn it black and white. It's pretty good. Now, certain parts about this I don't care about. Some of the buildings or the clouds, so we can get rid of those. Okay, well now we have gaps we got to fill. So let's add some more building to it and fix, yeah, that looks pretty good. Now that we have that, I can print that out over and over and over again and use that to cut out all of our pieces to make our artwork. Now we need to have a stable foundation for those pieces to go on top of. So I have this thick piece of wenge here. I'm going to cut some veneer sheets off of it and glue those onto a piece of MDF. That's going to give us a stable panel for us to then put all of our pieces on top of. Add a little bit of weight. Whew, let it dry. I have my wenge, I have my MDF, and I have my veneer press, which is going to make this job way easier. I decided that I want a light color for the background of my Spider-Man picture. So I took some maple boards, I glued them together, and I made a panel. And then I planed this down to about 1/8 of an inch thick. Now by itself, this is okay. It's kind of plain. Now I did find I have some beautiful birdseye maple veneer in my shop. So I'm thinking, why don't I take this veneer onto my panel and give it a little bit of that extra. Got the panel out of the press, and man, that was a good glue up. The veneer seam just completely disappeared. So now that we have our panel, I also printed out our Spider-Man picture, which took 4 sheets of paper. So now I need to take all these pieces of paper, stick them all together to make one big picture, and stick it under our panel. What always helps is I put my graphic right in the middle of my paper, so I can use the top edge here to line things up. And then as far as left to right goes, I put a dashed line down the middle. So I can just line up that dashed line, and I know my picture is perfect. I'm gonna cover the entire thing with packing tape. What that does is it prevents the template from fraying up as we're making all of our cuts. And then it's time to get out the scroll saw. I put a 5 reverse tooth blade in my saw. Now I'm gonna cut out everything that actually has a picture and then keep all of the white negative space. I got Spider-Man silhouette cut out, and then I have my wenge panel, so I'm gonna glue this onto my panel. It's important that we cover the entire thing with glue, but at the same time, don't drench it because you don't want that squeeze out in all these nooks and crannies. It's gonna be a nightmare to clean out. The silhouette looks beautiful, and now it is time to finally start cutting all those pieces and making up Spider-Man. Now with Spider-Man, we know he has 2 iconic colors, red and blue. Well, the blue, we're gonna use blue mahoe, just like we did with the inlay from the picture frame. The red, I'm gonna use bloodwood. So we need to go prep some wood so we can start scroll sawing. I milled down my boards so they're slightly raised higher than my silhouette. Printed out some pictures. Time to stick them on there. After over 3 hours of work, I have, well, a hand. Yeah, it's a bit of a process. But now comes the really fun part, which is working on that Spider-Man face. To ensure all my pieces go where they need to be, I work in stages. So I'm working on the head now, but I went ahead and cut out the body too. So I could put the body into place, and then as I'm working on the head, I know it's where it's supposed to be at. We got Spidey's face, we got his hand, looking good. There's a couple of little things. I might come back with a knife or a chisel and just kind of extend some of these lines, just kind of fine tune some stuff. But overall, I like it. Now it's time to work on the rest of his body. So what I think I'm gonna do is keep working on the red, because we look at his outfit, we've got some blacks and blues here and over here. All of this portion is red. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and continue to work on his chest, down this arm here, skip over the blue part, go back to the red, and then come back and I'll do the blues later. We have a couple of different directions for the cut. We have the cuts that go all the way down, but then we have the loops that kind of form that spider web. So I'm kind of having to make this in 2 different cuts. I cut the stem and then reverse the blade around. So in this instance, I came in and cut the stem. Then I could take my piece out, back it up into that stem, and now I can cut the spider web portions. Slow and steady, I'm working down the chest here, and you can see all these tiny little cuts that I've had to make. All these are purposeful cuts to give it that illusion of the webbing. So now I'm gonna move on to the next stages. I think this and this part here are all blue. So I have his hand I have to do, and then this bird wing part. You can see some of the tiny pieces we're working with here. Little wood glue, add a little bit of CA glue mixed in with that. Tweezers. Little spray. Putting a piece of MDF on my table here gives me a zero clearance insert, so now I can cut all of these little tiny pieces. A special thanks to our superhero community over on Patreon. Members like Stephen Witt are really helping out the channel, so if you're interested in signing up and just meeting a really cool group of people, then head on over to patreon.com/NewtonMakes and check it out. Well, the workbench is a complete disaster, but you know, Spider-Man's looking pretty good. Now we get to switch things up a bit. I grabbed some blue mahoe because now we're gonna work on the other part of the costume, all those blue aspects of it. So the arms and then the legs. These pieces are much bigger than the red pieces, so hopefully they'll go a little bit faster. Fingers crossed. Time to do his lower body, so I printed out a couple pieces of paper here. Now it looks like all of this is one giant piece. Now, there's a couple spots here that would be super fragile, so I'll probably cut it into several pieces, but most of this, all of this part right here, would be one piece, so might be able to knock out the lower body kind of quick. One comment that I get all the time is that I didn't do all of this correctly because I didn't stack all of my pieces, as in wenge, blue mahoe, bloodwood, you put them all together, you cut them out at one time, and then theoretically all your pieces fit back together perfectly. Well, that's a perfect world, and a lot of the projects I do is simply not feasible, especially with something like this where all those tiny little cuts. A lot of times I have to cut past my line, circle back around, and then make another cut. So you're either gonna cut that extra bit in the negative space or in the body part. Can't really have both. So yes, I end up cutting a lot of my pieces 2 or 3 times to make them fit together, but I'm in no rush. Look at this crazy looking piece. Goes right there. Now that he has legs, I gotta get some more bloodwood, knock out these feet. We finally finished up Spider-Man and he looks amazing. So now it is time to work on those background elements like the buildings. Now the color for the buildings is a little tricky. So what I did was I milled up this piece of walnut here and it is super sappy. And the reason for that is because I don't want it to blend too much in with the dark walnut frame we're gonna have. At the same time, I need it to stand out from the maple background that we have. So I think this is gonna be a good color for our buildings. Spent a couple days working on the building behind Spider-Man, and after I got done with it, I realized, well, I don't really like it. So unfortunately, I took a chisel and I ripped all of it out, had to resand it and scrape it all down and basically start all over. Now, the reason behind all this was it's a building, so our eyes want to see these straight lines naturally. However, it's also comic book art, which means there's a lot of heavy inks and there's a lot of shadow and that kind of stuff in it. So I tried to cut it with all the inks and the shadow like I did with Spider-Man. Unfortunately, your eyes don't really like that when it comes to a building. So after I got it all done, it looked like I kind of hit up the hotel minibar a little bit too hard. So just didn't work out, ripped it all out, started all over. This time, I didn't go all the way with the super straight lines. I added a little bit of shadow, but much more of a balance, and I think it looks pretty good. So now I can move on to that second building and then his webbing, and then cool, we can start planning to finish. After some ups and downs, everything looks great, and it's time to finally apply finish. So I'm gonna apply some Arm-R-Seal satin. The Arm-R-Seal is really gonna bring those colors to life. First things first, I'm taking a tiny little brush and trying to get the finish down in the cracks as much as possible. While I'm doing this, I can go ahead and answer some of the more common questions that I get. Anytime I post a scroll saw video online, I kind of get a couple of the same questions. I use an Excalibur scroll saw by General International, fantastic saw. I also like to use usually a number 5 reverse tooth blade for most of my cuts. Sometimes I'll go down to use like a 2, maybe like a spiral blade if I'm doing something super duper tiny. But usually I'll go with the number 5. I'm always asked if someone were to make something like this, what could they then turn around and sell it for? And I don't really know where that question comes from. I don't know if that means that they want to make their own version and then turn around and sell them. Honestly, I don't know. I've never sold scroll saw art, so I'm not really sure what the going rate would be for something like this. I'm always asked how many hours did it take to make that? And it really depends on the artwork itself. This one's my most labor intensive one I've done. So I'm gonna say I have at least 50 hours in this one. At least. I'm absolutely ecstatic with how this thing turned out. This is a picture that I knew I had to make. I've had this piece of artwork saved for a long time, and I just needed the time to be able to finally make it. And this is something that is for me. A lot of my scroll saw videos just simply don't get all the views that a lot of the other projects do. And I totally get it, because scroll sawing itself can be a little bit of a niche hobby. So this was a project really for me, and I am absolutely thrilled with how it turned out. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and if you did, maybe consider subscribing to the channel, and maybe check out this other video because you might like that one too. Until we meet again, get in your shop and build something awesome.